What's up guys, Fedo here with another tutorial for you. This time Up All Night, out and out on Interplay. A lot of people are asking about this track, how I made the drop in the piano. I'm gonna go over all of that right now. Received a lot of really good DJ support so far. Really happy with how this one's going. So let's get right into the tutorial. So let's get right into it. This is the final project file here. I did not do the final mix and master, someone else did. His name is Coimbra, Coimbra. I would definitely recommend using him for any of your mixing and mastering. He's the man. He's so good. I'll flip back and forth between the project file and the final mix and master, and they might sound a little bit different, but overall you get the general idea. His just sounds a little bit more cleaner and fuller because it's a master. So there might be some small differences between the master that you're hearing and this project file. The difference between that is I started this project on an old computer, opened it up on this new computer, and some of the samples didn't load correctly. Some of the plugins didn't load correctly. I've used plugins on my old computer that I haven't installed here yet. So you might notice some small differences there, but the general theme is there. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with the drop. Most important part of the song, obviously. I will play what it sounds like in the final master. Okay, that's probably enough there. So I'm gonna start with the piano. Most important part of this track is the piano. So there are a couple different layers of the piano. The first layer is the M1 piano. For the M1, I just used the Piano 16 preset. Only the Piano 16 preset. I think when you select it, it might load up other stuff right here, but I soloed only this sound. And I disabled all effects in M1. I really don't like the effects in M1. The reverb and the exciter, I think, were probably on this, and I disabled it. I did all my own processing in the mixer. The actual MIDI of the chord progression looks like this. This took me quite some time to build out. I think I started with the bass line for this and then built it up from the bass line. It's a really good way to build your chord progression, just kind of lay a bass line down and then build the other notes from that bass line. The other very important part with Piano House and this M1 is I adjusted the note length of the entire chord progression based on what I thought sounded best. So what I do in FL Studio is I select all the notes and I will snap to none. And I'll keep looping this sound and I will adjust these note lengths to get it where I want it, to get it where I like it. I ultimately settled on this note length, but this is very, very important, is to mess with the note length. So the processing on this thing was pretty intense, I'm not gonna lie. First I had the Ozone Imager making it a little bit wider. I think M1 might be completely mono, or if not, it's really mono. So I added some stereo with OTT, because OTT is the best, only 20%. SSL compressor, what this helps to do is make the whole sound a little bit more even throughout. I'm not going to go deep into compression because it is a very confusing topic. If you want to learn more about compression, just YouTube it. But yeah, I have a compressor on here. Another EQ, and I actually have a dynamic EQ here. There are probably some harsh resonances right there, so whenever that sound hit, it's dipping. Another EQ here, cutting out the low end, a little bit of low mids, 165. This is one of my favorite secret sauce Piano House plugins. It's the Greg Wells Piano Centric by Waves. It adds a really nice little high end. I'll play it with and without. So this is with and without. So if you're wearing nice headphones, you can probably hear that difference. Next, I have Fresh Air. This is one of the plugins that for some reason didn't load over when I transferred to this new computer. But Fresh Air, again, it's kind of similar to Greg Wells Piano Centric. It adds a really nice, clean high end without adding like a bunch of really bad resonances or harshness. So use Fresh Air, like 10 or 15%, not much. Next, I had the Hard Piano Soothe preset. So without it, it sounds like this. And with it. So it adds a little bit of actually harshness, I think. But typically I use Soothe as a resonance remover, but I liked this Hard Piano preset. So that routes to another channel where I have the Pultec UAD EQ. It's an analog emulation EQ, really cool way to add extra flavor to your sounds. Recently found out about it. Typically I've used FabFilter for EQ, for EQ shaping, but I recently learned it's good to start with an analog emulation EQ. It adds a lot of extra cool flavor to a sound. So I use this grand piano widen. I added another stereo imager, and this time I actually made it a little bit more mono. Basically, with all that processing that I added, it widened it even more. So I wanted to narrow it back down a little bit and use this. Then I have some reverb, really small reverb. I want this piano to be really upfront and center in the mix, so really short, low mix level. Next, delay. Again, I want it to be very upfront. I don't want a lot of delay and reverb on this sound, so pretty low mix and feedback level, 1/8 note. After that, I have Soothe to remove the resonances. I will select this delta option here to show you what it's removing. So it's removing all those sounds. Really nice feature. Another EQ, just cutting out the low end. And then for automations for the drop, I have Fruity Filter and Endless Smile that it's automating probably in the build up and then the breakdowns. Lastly, Kickstart to sidechain it. This is a pretty heavy sidechain, 91%, the classic chain. Typically with Piano House, like my track Attention, I think I have the mix level probably at more like 50%. Most Piano House tracks, traditionally, they're not sidechained very hard, the piano sound. But for this one, I kind of wanted more like a pumping progressive house type feeling and that 909 kick as well. So I used a really heavy sidechain. I like the way it sounded. Next sound I have here is a grand piano sound, and it sounds like this. For the grand piano, I use the Maverick by Kontakt, really nice piano sound, and I actually process this differently than the other sound. I have some EQ cutting out the low end, OTT again, only 15%. Isotope Trash, which is a nice saturation distortion plugin, and then some more EQ dynamically cutting out this area. Another EQ rolling off these highs. I roll off these highs because I want that to be filled by the M1 piano. I don't want the grand piano taking up that area in the mix. That's routed to another channel. Again, a reverb, very short. Echo Boy, Fab Filter, rolling off the highs again because I might be creating some high-end frequencies with the reverb and the delay. So I have another EQ on after it. And then again, Fruity Filter, Endless Smile, and then a sidechain, 90% classic sidechain, same as the M1. Other layer I have here is this white noise layer. Not much to it, just a white noise, adds a little bit of transient. I think it adds a lot of flavor to a sound adding. I add a white noise a lot to, no matter what the genre is, I'll try layering in a white noise. I often also layer in a transient. This transient sounds like this. The transient is barely sidechained. I think the sidechain on this is about 50%. So I don't want it heavily sidechained because I want it to punch through the mix. So that's everything with the piano sound. Now I'll talk about the bass. First, I have this sub layer. Isn't much to it, just a basic sub. And for the processing, Camel Crusher, Tube Warmth to make it a little bit more intense, and then EQ cutting out under 130 hertz because that's the only frequencies I care about is the low end for this. And then the Dickey Romero Kickstart 2 sub bass chain preset. For the mid bass, another Serum sound, and for this one I used this sound. I believe this is the same sound I use in Attention, so it's best to not recreate the wheel sometimes. Just go back through your other projects and see if you have any sounds that work. And for the processing for it, again, I use the UAD Pultec EQ. Another EQ cutting out the low end because I need that area for the sub, and then rolling off the highs because I don't want the mid bass occupying any of that high end area. Ozone Imager making it a little bit more wide. Typically, I like my mid basses a little bit more mono. Most tracks are that way for any electronic music. Sometimes people make it more wide, but it's more difficult to mix. But in this case, I made it more mono. Next thing I'm doing here is I'm adding a EQ cutting out the sides up to 225 hertz. I found this is a really good way to improve your low end in the mix, is just to cut the sides up to a certain point where you don't notice it. Last thing I have is Soothe, just removing some of the harsh resonances. And the last part is a side chain, 100%. The free punch setting. The other sound I have layered here is this transient bass. It's similar to the piano bass that I have up here. That's something that's really barely noticeable within the mix, but it actually adds a lot to it. It's not sidechained very much because I want it to actually really punch through. And that's really it as far as the mid bass goes, and the sub bass and this transient bass. The other part of the drop are all these risers, downers, sweeps, atmospheres, and stuff. I'll go through each one of these individually. So all those are playing with throughout the whole drop. They're sidechained probably about 50%. I don't want them completely sidechained, but I do want some sidechain to give some type of pumping feeling. The other part here is the drums. So the kick, there really isn't much to it. It's just a 909 kick. I'm a firm believer that if you use a good kick sample, you don't really need to do any processing on it. Maybe some like EQ, boosts, or cuts really small. But for this one, it sounded good, so I used the sample by itself, no processing on it. The drums are one of the parts that I think got messed up when I moved from my old computer to this new computer. So these drums might sound a little bit different than what is in the final version. But I'll go ahead and play them. For the processing for the drums, I routed them all to a bus here. I have a SSL compressor. I really like this West Drum Bus preset. EQ rolling off the lows. Fresh Air, again, it's not loading, but it adds a nice high end to the drums. And then a Fruity filter, which is for the automations into the breakdown. Other small part here, some drum fills. I try to add these to make things more interesting. The other thing playing here is this ARP. You can barely even hear it in the song. But once again, it's just kind of another way to add to the overall mix. It's something that if I do solo it in and out, playing the whole thing together, you might be able to actually notice it. I can hear it just a tiny bit. If you have good headphones on, you might be able to notice it. The other thing going on is this drop string. And so they explain the exact same chord progression as the piano. For the drop strings, I use Kontakt again, the session strings, staccato. Processing, not really much on it, just cutting out the low end and then side chaining it. Classic side chain, 75%, which is less than the piano. Then the end of the drop comes in the vocal chop. For that, Little Altar Boy, the hard tune drive, just cutting out low end and then side chaining it really heavy. So that's for the first drop. The second drop, I'm only going to go over some of the things that I added. It's very similar to the first drop. The only difference is I have another string layer where I just push everything up an octave. And then the chord progression actually changes here in the second half of the second drop. The whole point of that is just to make it more interesting for the listener. If it was the same chord progression, the first drop, the second drop, it's not going to grab their attention. So I found that adding these different notes to the chord progression, the second half, makes it more interesting. I also bring in these string pads in the second half of the second drop, as well as this support lead. Support lead is just a Nexus preset. The lead, progressive lead too. You would think this would be only good with like progressive house, but I like to kind of try sounds for different genres with something like piano house, because it's just might add something that you wouldn't normally expect. No processing on that, just a sidechain. The other difference with the second drop is the drums changed up a little bit. I added this drum and then this one as well. Once again, it's really just about adding variation from the first drop, make things more interesting. I think this one, this drum right here really helps add a lot of extra energy. So that is it. I hope this was helpful. Maybe another tutorial, I'll go through the whole track, but for this one, I just want to go over the drop because that's what people were most interested in, that were messaging me, wondering about the piano and stuff like that. So if you have any questions or comments, let me know. I hope I'll be able to answer everyone, and I hope this was really helpful.